What's up guys, my name is Wakar, I'm the Filthy Casual, and welcome back to my channel. So I've been wanting to share some deck profiles with you guys, but just, life has gotten in the way, but I did want to start making videos again. But we're kind of in a weird spot right now, so it's the end of September right now, and BT10 is a few weeks out, so just around the corner due to some delays within North America, but we're still not quite there yet. So I figured the best thing to do right now is share a deck profile with you guys that is from BT9, but it's expected to be relevant and actually pretty good in BT10. And so the deck that obviously comes to mind is MetalGarurumon X Antibody. This is a deck that I've played a lot in BT9. I do enjoy playing it, but it kind of also burns you out playing it just because it is really good and kind of high rolls, and people just hate playing against it for valid reasons. And we'll talk a bit about what those reasons are when we dive further into this video. So so without further ado, I wanted to share this guide to Garurumon with you guys. And you'll notice that I call this guide to Garurumon and don't specifically call out MetalGarurumon X Antibody, except obviously in the subheadings. And the reason for that is because unlike other OTK decks, MetalGarurumon X Antibody is not the star of the show. So it's not your main win condition within this deck. And let's talk a little bit about why that is. So first things first, the overview of this deck is it's a fast OTK deck which attacks multiple times. So we'll see multi-attack within other OTK decks as well, but it does differ a little bit. So first off, it has sort of pseudo jamming built in with some inheritables. We'll talk about that. So basically it has some battle destruction prevention. So that also includes destruction when it's attacking security, which gives your Garurumon sort of like the pseudo jamming ability. But most of the damage that it does, the reason that is different from the other OTK decks is because most of the damage done is at level 5. So unlike the other OTK decks out there, Alphamon, Wargreymon, or Grandis, most of the damage is done by your level 5s. Those decks all need to climb up to level 6. So inherently, this deck is a bit faster. You don't have to get all your pieces from level 3 to level 5 in order to commit to your OTK. You could do it at level 5. A lot of times you won't even need to climb into level 6. Now your level 6s like MetalGarurumon and MetalGarurumon X Antibody are great tools to have in the deck, but sometimes you'll find yourself winning without ever having to even go into them once. So one of the other reasons this deck is good, aside from the ones that are also mentioned, is it has access to bouncing, right? So it can return a lot of your opponent's Digimon from their field that are in their battle area back to their hand. And there are ways to play around that, but it makes things incredibly difficult, and oftentimes it puts your opponent in awkward situations where they know that if they commit to the board, that they'll probably do it for little to no value. The Digimon that they're playing out will probably be returned to hand the following turn, knowing that you have a stack in Raising, which is about to go into your Garurumon combo. And then finally, probably one of the most important things is that this deck is blue, and so being blue, it gains all of the benefits that Bandai has given blue, which is a bunch of consistency, access to things like Hammer Spark, and of course Ice Wall and Davis and all those things. So before we get into actual deck profiles, let's talk a little bit about the key cards and the matchup. So the key cards, and again, you'll notice here I don't actually show MetalGarurumon X Antibody. I'll talk a bit more about that when we get to the deck profiles, but these are actually the key cards that enable your OTK. And so the main card here to note is Garurumon X Antibody. So it's a 5 cost, 2 to Digivolve, no effect. It does Digivolve for 0 over a Garurumon. That also works in Raising. But the interesting part is an inheritable. So the inheritable reads all turns when this Digimon has Garurumon or Omnimon in the same and would be deleted in battle. You can trash 2 cards with the same level in this Digimon's Digivolution cards to prevent that deletion. And this is what I meant when I said there's pseudo jamming, right? So you can attack into security, and even if you die, you just detach 2 Digivolution sources of the same level. So a lot of times it'll be this Garurumon and another Garurumon that you have in sources. If you build your stack, if you're lucky and you build your stack with 2 Garurumons, that's even better then, because you can detach the rookie, and then you have, this isn't once per turn, so you can have 2 times protection, right? The first time would be that you detach the 2 Gabumons, and the second time you have the 2 Garurumons that you get to detach. And then we have, which is probably the center of this deck, the star of this deck, is this promo Garurumon. So this promo Garurumon is pretty standard when it comes to stats here. It's a little bit low on the DP side, so it's 6,000. which is why this is really helpful here. So this where Garurumon reads, when attacking once per turn, if the Digimon has a Garurumon Digivolution card, unsuspend this Digimon. Now, most of your level 4 Digimon are going to be Garurumon. So Garurumon X antibody doesn't count, but you never want to go into this without the Garurumon X antibody anyways. And you never want to have just this in your stack. You want to have this over a Garurumon. Obviously, there are times that doesn't work out, but just make sure that Garurumon is in your stack. Anyway, so this lets you attack multiple times. So the first time you swing, even if it dies with 6000 DP, which you probably won't be at. So we'll talk a bit about more how you can buff this DP. But when you swing into security, if he's going to die by battle, you can detach 2 Digivolution cards, 2 of your Garurumon, presumably, to keep him alive, and then he attacks again. And then he also has a pretty nice inheritable. His inheritable is your turn when you have 8 or more cards in hand. This Digimon gains security attack +1. And finally, there's this Where Garurumon X antibody. This also isn't like essential to the OTK, but it does enable it to a pretty good extent. So this Digivolve for 0 over Where Garurumon. So this is the only Where Garurumon you play within your deck, with a slight exception. There's a slight caveat there, and we'll get to that later when we get into the deck profiles. But when Digivolving, you unsuspend this Digimon. Then if this Digimon has Where Garurumon or X antibody in this Digimon's Digivolution cards, you return one of your opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon to the owner's hand. So this is really useful because you attack twice with this, you Digivolve into this, unsuspend, and then you attack again. And now if you have 8 or more cards in hand, you get that security attack +1, and all of a sudden you've done at a minimum of 4 checks. There is a way to bump this to 5 checks with just this line here, and we'll talk a bit more about that combo when you get into the deck profile. But this line here itself can easily net you 4 checks. So the 6000 DP is the part that's a bit concerning, but once you start playing this deck, you start realizing, especially in this format, sure, there are plenty of level 6s and level 5s running around, but a lot of times this will swing and it'll just live. And that's all it really needs to do. It just needs to survive that first check. And a second check, even if it dies, it doesn't matter, because you have the Garurumon, and then you can Digivolve into this, and it's swinging for at least 8. And again, it's not going to be 8, it's going to be more than that. And so next, let's get into just a quick overview of the matchup. So when we're comparing this to other OTK decks, I feel like this deck does have a little bit of an edge for the reasons I mentioned earlier, right? It doesn't need to climb up into your level 6s. You do most of your damage as a level 5. And just for that reason alone, there is a little bit more, I don't want to say consistency, but your win condition is easier to obtain. Now, this deck is really piece reliant. You need specific cards in your stack, unlike Grandis, which only needs the Grand Kuwagamon promo and Grandis in stack. That's all it really cares about. But again, you're only climbing up to level 5. When you're comparing this to Wargreymon X, I feel like, at least for me personally, I've played Wargreymon X a whole lot as well during this format, and I've played Wargreymon since 1.0, so I feel really comfortable against this matchup personally. Wargreymon X does have some built-in protection against your bouncing effects, where Greymon X has a similar inheritable to Garurumon, except if it's going to be deleted by effect or even bounce to hand or deck, you can detach 2 Digimon with the same levels to prevent that. That is like nice protection against this deck, but a lot of times you just don't care, right? You'll just kill them. A lot of people say, well, Wargreymon's better because it has this built-in protection. I don't care about your protection. I care about winning. And I'm going to kill you before that protection even matters, if that makes sense. Similarly, with these other decks, Alphamon is a really good, powerful deck. But I feel like the matchup is pretty even because if you can get to that level 5 faster and win, you just win. Now, Alphamon is a little bit trickier because it does have access to some blockers, and blockers do slow this deck down a lot, especially the Retaliation blocker. The Retaliation probably doesn't matter as much because, again, if it's... Retaliation does matter. But it does slow you down. But it is, like I said, it is still a relatively decent matchup for you just because you can OTK them faster. I would still put that about 50-50, but these are matchups that I do not think are difficult if piloted correctly and you play around them correctly. Now, Armor Rush and Magnamon X. Armor Rush hasn't seen a great turnout this current format in BT9. It's a decent deck. It does try to rush, but the problem is that you saw, where Garurumon X which is able to bounce a Digimon, right? So your armor, and it's level 4 or lower, so the armor Digimon your opponent has can just get bounced to hand. Now, of course, if they get to the Magnamon X, that's a bit more difficult to play around. However, I feel like I've also played that deck as well, and I feel like it's a bit inconsistent to rely on Magnamon as your win condition all the time. And this deck, again, like, is going to be fast. Magnamon X does require a little bit of setup, and this, I think, if they don't draw into it, they don't draw into it. You're just going to win. And then slower decks like Mastamon. Again, you're fast. You're going to do damage at level 5. You're probably going to beat Mastamon and these other slower decks before they can actually set up and pop off. Now, the one kind of catch to that is that hitting options in security against Mastamon or those kinds of decks is really, really detrimental to this deck. And which is why security control, I feel like, is a very difficult matchup. There are techs you can put into this deck to prevent a complete blowout by security control, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the deck profile section. But it does kind of trade off some consistency. And then D-Reaper is another one. D-Reaper is not an unplayable matchup by any means against when you're playing this deck, right? However, there's one card that you always have to fear, which is Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper in security is like almost like 9 times out of 10 an auto lose. Like, you can't do anything against it. But at the same time, a lot of times you'll just rush your opponent down and you'll just swing, and they just won't have Gatekeeper in their security, and you win. However, for that, like, you kind of just have to go for it. I'm personally a very conservative player, I want to say. I try to be careful. And if you wait against D-Reaper, you're probably going to lose. If they are able to set up their Gatekeeper, you're going to lose. So you have to just hope that you draw into pieces quick enough and then start swinging before their Gatekeepers are live. And also, at the same time, kind of just hope and pray that they don't have Gatekeeper in security. So yeah, with that, just like, you give this matchup gas, and you hope you win. There are probably other ways to play around this, but I'm personally very terrible in this matchup. And then the final one is Commandramon. Commandramon obviously it's really rookie rush type deck. There are techs you can run against this, but Commandramon, by design, is just gonna outspeed you and win before you can go into your Garurumon. Now, if you high roll, right? If you get your perfect line and turn 2, you can come out swinging, or turn 2 or turn 3, and just swing through your opponent's security, that's totally fine. But they do have access to blockers. You can bounce their blockers, but then they might just block your Garurumon swings before you can actually go into the Garurumon X to bounce their blockers. So that is a matchup that can be difficult, but again, it really depends on how quickly you're able to get to your level 5s. And so then the question is, how do you actually win against this deck, right? I think that's something that a lot of people have been struggling with. And so the best advice I can give is, if you have a board established already, make sure you stagger your levels. And the reason for that, we'll get to what MetalGarurumon X Antibody does in a minute, but they can only return all your Digimon with the lowest level to your hand. And so if you have a level 6 on board already, if you are able to throw in a level 5 somehow, your level 5 will get returned, most likely. It gets a bit more dangerous if you have just a level 3, if they have something in raising, because if they're raised, they can bounce your level 3 with their Garurumon, and then your MetalGarurumon, their MetalGarurumon X Antibody is going to bounce your bigger guy. But if you can have multiples of those, where Garurumon X Antibody only bounces one body, and so you can still protect yourself that way. The second way is just a high roll, right? Just get to your win condition before they do. Easier said than done that sometimes, right? Again, where Garurumon is a level 5, that's where they're going to start swinging. But if you get to your win condition first, you get to your win condition first. The other way to win is big blockers. So Gaiomon, if Gaiomon is able to set up well with the Greymon Inheritable, which gives blocker, before this deck is able to start swinging, it's going to have a rough time. Gaiomon is just going to block everything, and then to get past it, this deck has to go into... It's going to have to try bouncing the Gaiomon somehow, but Gaiomon can have protection with Greymon X as well, so it gets a little bit more difficult that way. And then obviously security bombs, right? This deck has protection against battle, but doesn't have protection against effects, and so security bombs are huge. Depending on the build, though, I should put an asterisk here, depending on the build. But if you're able to use things like, chaos degradation or pretty much anything, right? Even Flame Hell Sights would really hurt this deck. So any kind of security bombs, especially option cards, will really hurt this deck. And so with all this, I want to share 2 deck profiles with you. And these are 2 deck profiles that are from the top, I think, 4 within the San Diego Regionals Core TCG hosted, I think, just a couple of days ago, 4 days ago. And I think both these decks are the same deck, obviously, but they have different tech choices. And I think this is really interesting because this is really representative of different builds within this deck. And so the first one, this is the first place MetalGarurumon, and I think this is more of the traditional deck that you'll see for MetalGarurumon. And so I'm not gonna read all of these, but I will highlight the important ones. So Gabumon here is a very important searcher. You search top 3, you add an Omnimon and something with a Garurumon in its name to your hand. So pretty useful. You have a lot of search in this deck, and being blue, you'll have additional search as well. So Madoki is a nice floodgate. This deck is blue, so you get access to a lot of floodgates. He opted to only play 1. I personally play 2 Madoki, but you also have Syakomon and Madoki and Sayako, which are nice floodgates within blue. So you can opt to run more if you want to, which is great. And then Gabumon X Antibodies is something very similar to this Gabumon. You search the top 3, you add an X Antibody option, and a Digimon with Garurumon in its name or Omnimon in its name to your hand. Not both Omnimon and Garurumon, unlike this Gabumon, but you can add one or the other. This is great because you can Digivolve over this. If you have Cool Boy out, you gain additional memory, but you get the draw and you get additional searches. There's only one Omnimon in this deck, which we'll obviously get to, but these guys make him pretty searchable. There's a lot of times where even though you're only running 1, you'll end up with him in your hand somehow. And then there's this Gabumon. So he opted to run 3 of this, but this is honestly probably the Gabumon that I want to see the most in my opening hand. So this Gabumon is pretty important. All turns, its inheritable effect is if you have 8 or more cards in hand, this Digimon gains 1000 DP. And so again, all turns, which is nice, but it buffs up your Rare Garurumon. So this is going to be swinging for 7, 8 at minimum if you have this guy underneath him and 8 cards. Next, you have this Garurumon, which is very similar. Inheritable. If it has Garurumon or Omnimon in its name, its inheritable is all turns it gains 1000 DP. So the buff is nice. And then if this Digivolves over a Gabumon while it's in play, obviously, you gain a memory back. So if this guy or this guy is in its sources, if you Digivolve this out in the battle area, you're gonna be Digivolving for 1. So it is nice. But you'll notice that this guy, like you would think that 1000 DP buff is really important, right? Because you don't want to die to security with security checks, and you don't want to use up your Garurumon X Antibody. And so let's talk about this Garurumon first, right? This one's run at 4 while he opted to only run this at 2. I personally run this one at 3 and this one at 4. But let's talk about this one for a second. This is 4 drop. That's, I think, is important. 2 to Digivolve as well. And then its inheritable is when attacking, if this Digimon has Garurumon in its name, draw 1. Notice this is a once per turn, so this works really well with your Rare Garurumon and your Rare Garurumon. This enables OTKs a lot more than you would think. So if you're someone who's trying to get into this deck and you're thinking, hey, this Garurumon is definitely a lot better than this one because I don't want my Rare Garurumon to die, you're not wrong. But once you actually start playing the deck, you start realizing how much value this one actually provides you. There's 2 reasons. Number 1, 3 reasons, okay. Number 1, if you brick and you don't have a rookie, playing the 4 costs feels so much better than playing the 5 costs. Number 2 is the fact that it draws, right? I don't know what else to say, right? It draws cards. And the reason that's important is because your inheritable, which gives security attack +1 on your Rare Garurumon, has to have 8 cards or more. So you want to make this live early on. So early game, if you draw into this, you're probably not going to have 8 cards, but when you start swinging with this guy, you'll quickly get into 8, and we'll talk about why. 8 is obviously an important threshold in this deck, but there is a way to do 5 damage by the time you get to Rare Garurumon and swing with him. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so for those 2 reasons, I think it's at 3, but for those 2 reasons, this is very important. And I would definitely run this at least 3. If you're going to cut this for budget reasons, because it is a promo card and it's like $12 right now, run at least 3. Do not run 2. So I think that's pretty important. Moving on, we already talked about Garurumon X Antibody. This is a mandatory 4 of, there's no question asked. Where Garurumon X, like I said, this is important, but it's not like a main win condition. I personally run 4, but this deck profile, runs one where Garurumon Sagittarius mode. I'm not a personal fan of Sagittarius mode, but I'm not the one who topped. I got 64th place in a previous regional. This guy got first, right? So clearly just doing something better than I am. But Sagittarius mode has the inheritable is the same as Garurumon X antibody. I don't think that's as important. So if you're comparing this to like Wargreymon X, like Wargreymon, Metal Greymon Ultras mode has the same effect as Greymon X, which is nice. It's really nice to have in that deck. However, in this deck, like we talked about before, you're not really going into your level 6s as much, so the inheritable I don't think is as important. I think what's more important to note here is that if you have a Tamer in play, you're able to return 2 Digimon with level 3 or lower to your opponent's hand. So this is really good against, like, Commandramon or something. You can just bounce their Digimon to hand before they're actually able to swing. So I think that's really important. Quick time check. This video went on for a lot longer than I'd anticipated. I apologize for that. All right, so going back to this guy, you run forward this. We already talked about him. No questions asked. All right, so MetalGarurumon X antibody. So let's read this guy. So MetalGarurumon X antibody, 12,000 DP, pretty good. 4 to Digivolve, which doesn't feel great, but does Digivolve for 1 over a MetalGarurumon. When Digivolving, unsuspend this Digimon. That itself enables OTKs at times, so that is important. It gains blocker for the rest of the until the end of your opponent's turn. That can be relevant. It is relevant, but a lot of times you'll find yourself not needing that ever, and you'll just win. So keep that in mind. And then your turn, once per turn, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended, if it has MetalGarurumon or X antibody in its Digivolution cards, return all of your opponent's Digimon with the lowest level to the owner's hand. Absolutely devastating effect. That's why we talked about staggering your levels when you are playing against this deck, right? If you have a bunch of level 4s out, I got news for you. They're all going back to your hand, and you're probably going to lose at that point. So stagger your levels. The 1 cost is over MetalGarurumon is pretty good. So let's talk about this MetalGarurumon. So the question is, if you're going to run MetalGarurumon in this deck, which one do you run? I think looking at the Japan meta, this one was widely used. Some people were running the BT9 one, but I don't think that one ever saw too much play in top decks within the English version. And that's for a good reason. Once you start, you feel like that one has more value because it plays out bodies from its sources, but this one is actually very nice. So when Digivolving, gain 1 memory for every 4 cards in your hand. When attacking, if you have 8 or more cards in your hand and a Tamer in play, return one of your opponent's Digimon that has an on-deletion effect to the bottom of the owner's deck, and then you trash all the sources. The second part is just total garbage. It's almost never going to come up. I don't think I've ever used it once. The important part here is gain 1 memory for every 4 cards in hand. Now, recall that we talked about 8 cards in hand being a very important threshold. Going back to why this Garurumon is important. That was reason number 3. It just came back to me. So, not only does it enable the OTK, but then it enables this guy. If you have 8 cards in hand, this guy's going to cost 2 to Digivolve, assuming your opponent does not have memory blockers. If they do, bounce them with the Garurumon first. But a lot of times, you'll find yourself, if you're pushing late game, this guy's going to be Digivolving for 1. I mean, if you have 12 cards, 1 cost, and then you Digivolve into this guy for another 1. So for 2 costs, you've Digivolved your level 5 into a level 6, which isn't unheard of. Right, like we've had Placiomon and Phoenixmon for the longest time. I mean, but this guy has a crazy effect where he unsuspends, he bounces a bunch of stuff, and then he's also going to be a blocker. But most of the time, you're probably just going to be swinging for game anyways. This guy acts as a great extender to finish off your opponents, to bridge into your MetalGarurumon. I personally run 2. I understand why people run 1. You really only need to see 1 the entire game. All right, Omnimon. He's just a finisher. You're going to climb up to this guy. If you can get into him and you swing and you don't win, you go to Omnimon and you swing for game. If you get into this guy but don't have this guy or enough memory to win, you just go to Omnimon to win. Again, he is searchable by both of your Garurumons, so you actually end up with him in hand a lot more than you think. I think 1 is plenty. You can bump it up to 2, but I personally am happy with 1. All right, let's talk about X Antibody. This card is a very important card in this deck. A lot of people don't realize how essential this actually is. So the main combo of this deck is you're going to get into your Garurumon. That's pretty straightforward. You're going to swing for 1 check, hope you don't die. If you do, you detach this material along with this Garurumon. But yeah, you draw with this guy, you swing, you unsuspend, right? So that's 1 check. If you swing again, there's going to be 2 checks. If you swing a third time with him and you have 8 or more cards, it's going to be 4 checks. This lets you kind of speed up that process, right? So you're going to swing once. You're going to do 1 check. You're going to pop this guy underneath him. You're going to tuck this underneath the stack. You're going to swing a second time with this, so you're going to Digivolve into Garurumon on swing by this inheritable, right? So the inheritable is you can Digivolve a Digimon when attacking. This Digimon can Digivolve into a Digimon card with X antibody in its traits from your hand by paying the Digivolution cost, right? So you swing with this once, you swing with the second time with this underneath it, you Digivolve into Garurumon X antibody, you unsuspend. So he's unsuspended, but you already declared your attack. It's going to proc the security attack +1 if you have 8 or more cards. So now you've done 1, 2, 3, 3 checks total. You swing with them again for another 2 checks. That's 5 checks, right? 5 checks in 1 turn. If you have enough cards in hand and enough security, you can go, or enough memory, you can go into MetalGarurumon and then bridge into this guy and unsuspend and swing for game. So I mean, by the time you're pushing him out, you're probably going to build into this insecurity. So you should have at least like a memory or 2 to work with, right? So X antibody, absolutely essential. I'd run at least 2, maybe even 3 if you had the room. Ice Wall is Ice Wall. I'm not going to go over this. Run Ice Wall. Like, if you're running blue, run Ice Wall. Blue Memory Boost. This deck needs consistency, right? It is piece reliant, unfortunately, which is one of the downsides of this deck. So you need as much consistency as possible. Blue Memory Boost does that. I mean, that's all I have to say. Obviously, it also, on subsequent turns, you can also push out your level 4s and maybe go into this guy a bit sooner than you would without the additional memory. And then, obviously, if you don't have enough memory to go into these guys, you can pop your boost, go into this guy, swing for game. So this whose was this? Jose, I want to say? No, this one was, it was Jose's deck list. So he runs 3 Hammer Spark. I personally don't run Hammer Spark. I should probably try it out more. But Hammer Spark, if you want to run it, definitely try it out. 1 Cocytus Breath because removal is good, right? We're in an OTK meta. Having security bombs is good. I personally don't like Cocytus Breath. The one matchup I have a lot of difficulty against, like I mentioned, is D-Reaper. It does nothing against that. If you bounce their Gatekeeper, they're just going to play their Gatekeeper again. That being said, this is great against OTK decks, especially if you have this insecurity. And sometimes you do wish you just had some hard removal aside from this guy's bounce. Then Davis. So Davis is one of the tamers that's a bit, I wouldn't say questionable. I think Davis is probably the most common memory tamer you'll see in this deck. There's another one we'll talk about right after this. But Davis has the benefit of, I said consistency is key. So if you want consistency, you run Davis. Davis searches top 3 and has a blue Digimon in your hand and a green one, but you don't run any green. So Davis is really important. I run 2 Davis, but I don't fault him for playing 3. I mean, what I would personally do is maybe cut a Hammer Spark for a second Davis. But again, I didn't get first place. So take that as you want. And then 3 Cool Boy. Cool Boy helps you get your pieces, right? You need to have Guruman X Antibody. Of course, there are times you will just have to swing without Guruman X Antibody and hope you live. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you'll win. But Guruman X Antibody is really important for you to survive, for this little 6K Garurumon to survive. And so you want this guy. You need this guy to finish up your game. And obviously having this one here, MetalGarurumon X Antibody, is a great way to protect yourself, bounce a bunch of stuff, control the board, and potentially even OTK. And obviously, by the time you're digivolving from this to this, unlike other decks, you're not going to be digivolving your level 5s. You're not going to be digivolving your level 5s up in raising. You're going to push out this rare Garurumon and swing. And so your Cool Boy will always get you some benefit, right? When you're going for that OTK. Unlike other decks where like maybe you build up your stack. So for example, say Grandis, you wouldn't get your Cool Boy to proc until you go into Grandis itself, right? But this, you're going to be procking it for sure. Anyways, that is the deck profile for this first place one. Let's talk about the Tsunamon. The deck's just 4 Tsunamon. This is pretty standard, I think. Your turn, well, this Digimon has Omnimon or Guruman in its name, gains 1,000 DP. So right away, this is definitely going to be 7,000. If you can get this, that's 8,000. So you feel pretty comfortable swinging into security with the 8,000 DP level 5. Obviously, if you have this guy, this guy gets to 9. So you feel a lot more comfortable, like I said, swinging into security with this guy. Even if he dies, who cares? He just needs to survive one check. And sometimes it does feel kind of gimmicky, but it is what it is. All right, finally, let's get to the second deck profile that I want to talk about. Very similar. You'll see he runs 4 of this. Like I said, he does a 3-3 split. I don't like that. I would have this at 4, but again, I didn't get, what is this, third place. He also runs the Sagittarius mode. It's very similar, but then you get to this part here, which is the hero and the delicate plant. So I mentioned that security control is a major it's a deck that this deck sometimes struggles with. And so one way to easily get around that is just to play hero. Now, hero has 2 benefits. Hero's effect is, start of your turn, he's a memory tamer. And then when you have a Digimon that's level 5 or higher, that's swinging, when it attacks, you can suspend this guy to have that Digimon gain 2,000. So it buffs up your Garurumon even further. So it can potentially swing for, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11,000 is a pretty good threshold. You should feel pretty safe swinging into that. And then it's a red tamer. So it gives you access to a delicate plant. So you can swing into security, and after you play this, you're not afraid of hitting options, especially against security control. And so this is really valuable. But now you have to kind of think about the trade-off here. You're sacrificing your consistency with Davis to play hero. So I think this is a meta call. I don't think it's a correct answer here on which one to play. If you anticipate there being a lot of security control or security heavy decks in the format, you play the hero. Otherwise, what you're pretty much doing is that you are sacrificing your consistency and lowering your kind of win rate against all other decks just to cater to one specific deck, which is security control. So really keep that in mind. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer. I personally don't play hero anymore. On the surface, for a lot of new players to the deck, they think that hero is the better way to do it, but the consistency that I got from Davis is just, I think, irreplaceable. But that's pretty much it. That's all I had for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile. I hope you're able to learn something about this deck and it was helpful for you. If anything, even if you hate this deck, maybe you have a better idea of how it works and how to play against it. But that's all I had for you guys. Again, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time.